Of Kevin O'Sullivan. I'm here until 5 o'clock here on TalkTV and Talk Radio. Some breaking news for you first. Ex-PC Adam Provan, 44, has been jailed at Wood Green Crown Court for 16 years with a further 8 on extended licence for multiple rapes against a 16-year-old girl and a female police officer. We'll have more for you on that story coming up as we get more information on this particular piece of breaking news. Let's go back to what we were talking about with Charlie Downs before we got into Edinburgh Fringe Festival's worst one-liners. The subject that never goes anywhere, does it, which is the Channel migrant crossings, and Rishi Sunak saying it's a complex problem. There's not a simple solution. He won't solve it overnight, probably won't solve it before the next election, as we learn that it's going to be continuing to cost British taxpayers £5 billion a year in putting these people who are coming into the country illegally up in hotels. Now, it's interesting, actually, to also see that town hall deficits, that's what local authorities need in order to plug their gaps and keep our public services running. Well, their deficit is £5 million a year alone, and government borrowing has actually gone down by almost a similar figure. It's about £4 billion a year. And a lot of this, by the way, has been because the government have raided self-assessment taxpayers to plug that gap. So essentially, it seems to me that working man and woman, the backbone of British society, is now not getting any public services because they're paying for characters from overseas to stay in hotels. Now, people are going to tell me that is not the way the numbers actually add up. Money doesn't move so fluidly between departments, but you just look at the raw data, and it pretty much is, isn't it? Let's not pretend otherwise. Well, to discuss further the fact that record number of migrants have crossed the Channel yet again, 661 yesterday alone. We're going to be joined now by Jeremy Hutton, who's a research consultant at Migrant Watch. Jeremy, great to have you on the programme. Let's go back to what Rishi Sunak said about this being a complex problem. There's not a simple solution and it can't be solved overnight. I mean, first of all, the government have seemingly tried a lot of things. They've tried to literally get off the ground this policy of sending migrants to Rwanda and faced all sorts of legal obstacles. They've tried to put migrants on this barge and now there's nobody on it, and Lord knows what's happening with the Bibi Stockholm. Is there a silver bullet, if you will, to solve this? Or is Rishi Sunak actually being fairly genuine when he says it can't be solved overnight?
Well, of course, it's easier to say it can't be solved overnight now that it's been 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 months or so since he said that he will stop the boats, and of course has made very little progress towards that. I mean, the crossings have fallen, but he can't really take credit for that, as he tried to do earlier this year and sort of end up with pie on his face. As for there being a silver bullet, some people do think the Rwanda scheme might be that silver bullet if you can illustrate that you can send enough asylum seekers to Rwanda to show the others that it's just not worth paying, £3,000 or £4,000 to cross the Channel illegally in quite a dangerous boat, as it was recently shown. Then the hope is that will prove enough of a deterrent. I mean, if the idea of sending people to Rwanda, where we can only send 500 people, we've got a backlog of about 150,000 at least, if the idea that this, because it would make headlines, would be a significant enough deterrent, surely the argument is that turning back just one boat would do the same. Well, I think they're hoping to get much more than 500 there. I think that's the initial capacity, but even the Rwandan government, I think, have said that they'll be able to scale up significantly beyond that. I think the problem is now in that there might have been an initial period at which there was a deterrent effect simply of the Rwanda plan, but that's clearly worn off entirely, because now a lot of asylum seekers would be thinking, well, the British government are saying they're going to do this, but they're not actually doing it. They're not, they're talking the talk, they're not walking the walk. And I don't think it'll take one boat. I think it'll take, several thousand really to make it quite provable to people wanting to cross legally into the country that there is a serious threat that they will be sent, into the heart of Africa rather than being sent into a hotel somewhere on the outskirts of London.
It's not the problem, though, that the minute people actually set foot in this country, they then have at their service various NGOs, Care for Calais and the like. They've got immigration lawyers. If they can afford to pay 10 grand to a people trafficker, they can pay money to an immigration lawyer who will use the full force of European law, UK law, case precedents and so on and so forth. And already the government are then facing constant legal challenges. The best way to deal with this is before people actually get here. We've tried giving France money. They're not doing anything. Seemingly Belgium seems to be able to stop boats. Is not the best way of the government dealing with this to actually stop the flow of people before they actually hit terra firma in Britain?
Ideally, yes. It's just not really very easy because, of course, the Australian experiment of doing things like pushbacks simply isn't possible in the Channel because it's so narrow. There's no international waters. It's British and French waters, line to line, as it were. And then there's not really much they can do about them in France themselves unless the French authorities actually do what they're promising to do.
I mean,
there was always a worry this month that the French police wouldn't stop as many because I think a lot of them are on holiday or on strike or something like that. But the Belgian example does make everyone think, well, maybe the French aren't really giving it their all. And it is in their interests to try harder because as long as these people are successfully crossing, they have an incentive to come into France in the first place.
I mean, that was the Belgium argument, wasn't it? That we don't want to be like France because it's actually going to be a magnet to drawing people through our own country. I mean, I really want to focus back on this, stopping people midway through the Channel, because we saw the other day, actually, tragically, when that boat sank and various migrants ended up losing their lives as a result, which is tragic. I don't care what people say. It is awful when people die at sea, and it sort of goes to show how desperate some people are, whether they're illegal economic migrants, whether they're being shipped in by gangs or whatnot. But as I understand it, the French Navy had accompanied that boat to a halfway point and then said, right, on your way to Britain. So if the French Navy can seemingly chaperone an illegal crossing into British waters, why can't we turn around and say to the French Navy, no, back from whence it came?
Well, I think the problem is that the small boats don't let anyone help them until they get into British waters, and then the French generally just don't help unless it's actually, a serious crisis, and then even then, they'll be thinking twice about it. While, of course, because they're in British waters, it's our core responsibility at that point to rescue them in distress, and because they do overload themselves into boats with not really enough fuel and far too many people in them, they do have a very clear case of distress because they've kind of designed it to be like that. Unfortunately, the French apparently have a different interpretation of maritime law, so they think, well, if they don't let us help them, then we don't have to, while apparently the Belgians have a bit more of a realistic view and just think, well, they're clearly in distress, even if they don't say so, we're going to stop them, we're going to intercept them. And really, that's clearly the right course that the French should be pursuing. Well,
I think there's many political reasons why the French don't want to pursue it. To be right to be sending France millions and millions per year to tackle this, when clearly it seems that you would agree with me that the French don't seem to be wanting to do their bit in preventing these illegal crossings.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I didn't realise I was still on.
You are still here. You're still with me. I haven't sent you back to France just yet. So, I mean, should we be sending France huge amounts of money to tackle this when the French are clearly being negligent in their duty?
I don't think the French are really giving us value for money at all. I understand why politically they don't, because, I think Macron realises he's quite unpopular amongst a lot of the French electorate. But we can't keep handing them more and more money. There has to be other ways to diplomatically address this with the French to get them to do this. And if it has to be that we have to take more of a hand across Europe in a broader whole, trying to help again the Mediterranean more, maybe that's what we have to do in terms of helping out to convince them to actually do, take more of a pan-European approach. Of course, there is the post-Brexit effect where they're all a little bit aggrieved, I think, that we left the EU. But, it's past time to get over that and just work together when it's in everyone's mutual interests.
Working together in mutual interest. You could work for the European Commission, but we know that isn't how it works. Jeremy, fantastic to have your thoughts on this. A research consultant at Migrant Watch UK, very sensible think tank indeed. Always love hearing from them. We're going to take a short